Father Carlos Martins had faced many battles against darkness, but nothing had prepared him for the ordeal that lay ahead. In his 2 decades of ministry, he had encountered the grotesque, the terrifying, and the inexplicable. Yet there was one case that stood out above all, a nightmarish confrontation with evil that would haunt him forever. He noticed the change in the air as soon as he stepped inside the room. The temperature dropped so drastically it felt like stepping into a freezer, the cold biting into his skin through his cassock. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, for he knew what was about to happen. The room was small and dimly lit, the shadows seeming to stretch and distort as if mocking the sanctity of his presence. In the center of the room lay the victim, a young man bound by an unseen force. The man's body contorted in ways that defied human anatomy, his limbs twisting as though they were made of rubber. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted around the room with a primal fear, yet they did not seem to focus on anything tangible. Father Martins could sense the presence of evil, a malevolent entity lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to strike. He saw the first sign almost immediately. A chair in the corner of the room began to levitate, rising slowly, deliberately, as if to test his resolve. Father Martins didn't flinch. He had seen this trick many times before. The demon's attempt to sow fear, to unsettle him, was futile, yet he remained vigilant, for he knew that what was to come would be far more sinister. As the chair hovered in the air, the young man let out a guttural growl, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. The growl was not human, it was deep, primal, something that emanated from a place of unimaginable darkness. The man's head snapped back, his eyes rolling into the back of his head, leaving only the whites visible. His neck twisted, but not enough to cause injury, just enough to make it clear that what was controlling him had no regard for the limitations of the human body. Father Martins began his prayers, his voice steady and unwavering despite the chaos unfolding around him. The words were ancient, powerful, imbued with the authority of centuries of faith. As he prayed, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, his breath visible in the cold air. The demon was resisting, pushing back against the holy words with every ounce of its strength. He noticed the sudden flicker of the lights above, a dimming that felt unnatural, as though the very electricity in the room was being drained by the malevolent force. The walls seemed to close in, the room becoming smaller, more oppressive with each passing moment. The young man's body convulsed violently, thrashing against the restraints that held him to the bed. His mouth opened, and a voice that was not his own echoed through the room, a voice filled with rage and hatred, spewing blasphemies and curses in languages long forgotten by the world. Father Martins pressed on, undeterred by the onslaught. He had faced demons before, each one more cunning and ruthless than the last, but this one was different. There was a raw power here, a darkness that seemed to seep into the very fabric of reality. He could feel it pushing against him, trying to worm its way into his mind, to plant seeds of doubt and fear. But his faith was a fortress built on years of spiritual discipline and unwavering belief in the power of God. Then the room grew still, unnaturally so. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the young man on the bed. Father Martins could sense that something was about to happen. Something that would push him to the very limits of his endurance. Without warning, the young man's body levitated off the bed, rising into the air until he was suspended several feet above the mattress. His limbs hung limply at his sides, his head lolled back, and from his mouth a thick, black liquid began to ooze, dripping onto the sheets below. The stench was overwhelming, a putrid odor that filled the room and assaulted Father Martin's senses. He felt bile rise in his throat, but he forced it down, focusing on the task at hand. the liquid continued to flow, forming a pool on the bed beneath the man. It was as though the very essence of the demon was being expelled from the young man's body, but Father Martins knew better. This was another trick, another attempt to break his resolve. The demon was far from defeated. It was merely biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike. He noticed the temperature suddenly rise, the cold replaced by an oppressive heat that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dripping down his face as he continued his prayers, his voice growing hoarse from the strain. The young man's body began to convulse again, his back arching unnaturally as he writhed in mid-air. The demon's voice returned, this time more insidious, more cunning. It taunted Father Martins, mocking his faith, his God, his very existence. It spoke of things it should not have known, secrets buried deep within Father Martins' soul, memories he had long since locked away. The words cut deep, but he did not falter. He knew that the demon was trying to distract him, to break his concentration. He would not give it the satisfaction. The struggle went on for what felt like hours, the battle of wills taking a toll on both the exorcist and the possessed. Father Martin's prayers grew louder, more forceful, as he called upon the power of the Almighty to cast out the demon once and for all. The young man's body was now trembling violently, his skin pale and clammy, as if the very life was being drained from him. Finally, there was a moment of stillness, a brief pause in the storm. The young man's body dropped back onto the bed with a heavy thud, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he gasped for air. The black liquid had ceased its flow, the foul odor lingering in the air like a grim reminder of the presence that had just been vanquished. But Father Martins knew it wasn't over yet. The most dangerous demons were the ones who feigned defeat, who waited until the exorcist's guard was down before launching their final, desperate attack. He kept his focus, his prayers continuing in a steady rhythm as he moved closer to the bed. The young man's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear, free of the darkness that had clouded them. But it was a fleeting moment, and Father Martins noticed the shadow returning, creeping back into the man's gaze. Suddenly, the man's body jerked violently, his hands clawing at the air as though trying to grab onto something invisible. His mouth opened in a silent scream, his eyes wide with terror. And then, without warning, every object in the room began to move. The bed shook violently, the walls groaned, and the furniture toppled over, crashing to the floor with deafening thuds. The demon was making its last stand, throwing everything it had left at Father Martins in a final attempt to drive him away. But Father Martins stood his ground, his voice rising above the cacophony as he delivered the final, decisive command. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave this man and never return." There was a moment of silence, a brief, heart-stopping pause as the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the demon was torn from the young man's body, a dark, shadowy figure that dissipated into the air like smoke in the wind. The temperature in the room returned to normal, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the young man collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but free. Father Martin stood there for a moment, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The battle was over, but the toll it had taken was immense. He looked down at the young man, who was now sleeping peacefully, the lines of terror and pain slowly fading from his face. The room was a mess, the aftermath of the fierce struggle evident in the overturned furniture and broken objects scattered across the floor. He knew that this was not the end of the war, merely a single battle in the ongoing fight against the forces of darkness. But for now, Father Martins allowed himself a moment of peace, a brief respite, before the next call would inevitably come. He had done his duty, faced the demon head-on, and emerged victorious. But deep down he knew that the darkness was always lurking, always waiting for its next opportunity to strike. As he left the room, the door closing softly behind him, Father Martins whispered a prayer of thanks, his thoughts already turning to the next soul that would need saving. The darkness may be relentless, but so too was his faith, and as long as he had breath in his body, he would continue to stand against it, no matter the cost. Friends, there is power in the name of Jesus. Every knee must bow, no matter who or what it is. Do you have such an experience you know about? Please share it with us below, and don't forget that demons are defeated foes. No weapons formed against you will prosper. Until the next video, God bless.